Now, all of you would have seen your university website, right? So basically what happens, if you want to go check your semester result, there is going to be a website. You will log to that particular website by typing the URL. What is the full form of a URL? Uniform Resource Locator. Where will you enter the URL? You'll enter the URL in the address bar. So something like this appears. It will say, enter your roll number. You'll enter the roll number the university has given you. And then you click on submit. Let's say your roll number is DCT 102. You click on submit. It'll come back and it'll give you the result. It says, okay, you've passed 7.3 CGPA. It is time to rejoice. 7.3 is a decent score. It's time to rejoice. Now, my question to you guys is, this information, when you make a request to the server or when you type something in the input field and click on submit, it is appearing to you on your website. Now, my question to you is this result of how much you have scored, is it already present in the website? Is it already present in the website? On the UI, is it already present? No, right? So basically, you need to keep in mind is front end basically takes the inputs from the user, and then all the information at the end of the day resides in a special software called as a database. That's where the information is stored. Now, my question to those of you who have done a little bit of programming in the past. Now, when I click on the submit button, can somebody tell me how does this USN, your register number, how is it sent to the backend to be searched in the database? Okay, so there's term API. Okay, that's one of the terms. But programmatically, what is that you would be doing to ensure that this information that the user has typed on the browser is sent to the server? Can anybody tell me? It is going to be sent as a query. Okay, very good. We're getting right answers. Something like an API. We heard about APIs. How many of you heard this term API in the past? How many of you really know what an API is? Okay, we'll learn about it as days go by. Nothing to worry. So basically what happens is when you enter the roll number and click on submit, this is basically going to be the role of JavaScript. So what JavaScript typically does is you write something called as an event handler. That is, you can write functions. Again, if functions are something new to you, over the next 1 to 2 weeks time, you will kind of get a better understanding of this, not to worry. So there's going to be a request that you're going to be making to the backend. So there are specific technology that browsers provide. There's something called as an XHR object. Have you heard of XHR? Anybody? Have you heard of XHR? Okay, no problem. So there's something called as an XHR object that the browser provides. Browsers are your Chrome, Mozilla, Firefox, all of them. They have this inbuilt functionality called as an XHR object, which stands for XML HTTP request. So using that particular browser feature, we can actually make a request to our server. In our stage 1, we will be doing all these kind of things, right? How do we create an XHR object? How do we make a request to the server? So you need to keep in mind that even though this is kind of your end result, you enter your roll number, somehow magically your information is going to be displayed. Your result is displayed. I hope the marks that you have scored is not a magic number. You would have worked towards it, but you kind of get the result being displayed. So what actually happens, you need to keep in mind that whenever you're developing any kind of a web application, I'm taking this as an application because all of you can relate to this. All of you would have used your university website number, and whatever we are discussing will also hold good for any of the other kinds of applications that you're using. It could be, let's say, Zomato, or it could be Amazon or Flipkart. All of this is still applicable even on those sites. So firstly, you need to know that whenever you're developing any application, it basically comprises of 3 parts to it. The first one is called your front end. And people refer to this in different ways. They say UI, that is user interface. They will also say it is the client side. Now we need to keep in mind that at every different vertical, so we talk about 3 different verticals that is going to be present. So one is your front end, the other one is your back end. Back end is also called as your server side. Front end is client side, back end is server side. And then we talk about database, right? So these are the 3 different components, or these are the 3 different verticals which comprises of any web application or any application, you can say. Now you need to note that at each of these verticals, there are different technology that is involved, right? At each of these verticals, there are different technologies that is going to be used. Well, IT has been in a boom for a very, very long time. Every part of our life is kind of touched by one software or the other. So there are way too many technologies that are there. Now, remember, we say in our yesterday's class, we spoke about narrowing down on things that you should be knowing. So IT is like super vast. Now, should I know everything before I'm in a position to land job? Answer is no. You need to know specific things in detail. You don't need to know everything. There is way too much. So at each of these different verticals, there are different technologies that are involved. So what happened whenever we entered that roll number, DCT 102, we saw the result being appearing on the website. But typically what happened was when you entered in that input field and clicked on the submit button, you typically made something called as a request to the backend. And to make this request, you're going to be using this object called as XHR, which is already built into browsers. And again, keep in mind, especially as a developer, the first and the foremost thing is you need to know what a technology offers. What is that it is offering? What are the things that are present? And you as a developer, using these available concepts, you will develop your app. It is very similar to how your mother or father is preparing food at home. It's very similar. There's no difference from cooking to writing a software code. Because even if you have to go and cook or prepare a dish, you need to first have the ingredients present at home. Only then using that, you can develop an app, you can cook something. Similarly, even in software development, the programming language offers a lot of things to you. First and the foremost is you need to know what the programming language offers, how it can be used. Using that, you can develop your own software. So before getting into development, you need to know what is that the languages are offering. Okay, let's come back to this. So what happened was from the front end, you always initiate something called as a request. Have you heard of this term called as client server technology? Have you studied about this in your college days? You might have come across this, client server. So client server revolves around a front end making a request and a back end giving a response. So these two are technical terms, request and response. Now, one of the key things that you have to focus on is enhancing your vocabulary. That is your technical vocabulary. So you will not say that, okay, from here it will go there, from there it will come here. You don't use things like that. That's very generalized. But somebody in tech, you need to start using these tech jargons. You would say something like, okay, we make a request to our server. So this is your front end. There is your server, right? You need to use those technical terms. We always make a request to the server. Again, please keep in mind, server is not where the information is kind of stored. It's the database where the information is stored. So what a server does is it'll handle incoming requests. So whatever request you make from your front end, a server handles the incoming request. And then it talks to the database saying that, hey, you know what? I want you to find the result for this particular roll number that is coming in. Now, a server not only is handling the incoming request, but there's a lot of security related code already written there. Like, for example, well, you cannot be in a position to manipulate or add marks into the system. Somebody who is an admin will be able to log into that particular system and add information. All that kind of security code is typically managed at your server side. That's your backend. So what the server does, it makes a request to the database. Database is where all the information is basically stored. Database will fetch that information, pass it on to the backend. Please go. It will pass it on to the backend. Again, there are a couple of things that you have to observe. Frontend never talks to the database directly. Frontend always talks to the backend. Backend is what is talking to the database, because backend is where your security related code is going to be written. Is the user making a valid request? Does he have the permission to access all of this? If backend is eliminated, there is no security layer in your application. Frontend then directly talks to the database. So you're eliminating the security layer. That should not be happening. That should not be the case. So there is always going to be a backend associated. And again, database does not give the information directly to the front end. It passes it on to the backend. It could be for some formatting purpose. And then the backend gives something called as a response to the front end. So typically what would have happened is, on your university website, when you entered your roll number, you clicked on the submit button. From the front end, the information was sent as a request to the backend. Backend read that particular request, did any kind of a processing that was necessary. Then it spoke to the database, asking for that particular information. Database is this special software where all the information is basically stored. Database gives the information to the backend. Backend then passes that information to the front end, right? So this is how basically a web application works. It could be your university's website. It could also be an orders page on Flipkart. So you've logged into Flipkart, you click on My Orders, and somehow all the previous orders that you've placed is shown, right? Or you're searching for a train ticket. You enter your source, destination, the number of tickets. Somehow all the trains that are available is shown to you. Now, where is all the information stored? It's going to be stored in the database. But how does the process work? Frontend makes a request to the backend. Backend handles that particular request, talks to the database. Now, remember I said backend is where typically the security related code is going to be written. If I log into Flipkart and click on My Orders, only my previous orders is shown. When you log into Flipkart and click on My Orders, only your previous orders is shown, right? How is all of that happening? All of that is kind of taken care at the server side, right? Yes, please go ahead. Make a note of this particular diagram on a fresh sheet. We will be going back and referring to this diagram over the next 6 months' time. So write it in a place where it is accessible to you. So we are looking at you need to know this, for which you get a response. This is the underlying for a client server technology. Will a browser be treated as a client? Is there any other thing which could be a terminal? Very good. A terminal can also be treated as a client. Terminal you're referring to as command prompt. Okay. Anything else that can be treated as a front end client side? Can you think of anything else as a front end? Display to you. What other can be treated? Right. And all apps. End of the day, your mobile apps are also treated as your front end, isn't it? So the term here is the request and response. Now, how do I make a request? Browsers provide us with a special object. It's called as an XHR object. XHR. Anybody who's done? Okay, no problem. jQuery, $get JSON. Anyone? Okay. Now, please keep in mind this XHR object I'm speaking to you about, browsers provide. It is the backbone of your entire tech stack, because we know that information is not put in the database. Somehow we need to be in a position to talk to our backend to collect the information. So time you're making a request to the backend, every time this XHR object, which you will be seeing in a couple of weeks, that is going to be used for making a request to the server. Anybody who has done preliminary React.js courses on YouTube, Udemy? Okay, have you used Axios? You know Axios? How many of you have used Axios? Okay, so Axios is basically built on top of your XHR object. Why are you using Axios? You're using Axios to make a request to the server. So Axios is actually built on top of this XHR object. Anyway, for those of you who are not aware of Axios, when we start learning React.js, we will learn what Axios is and how it works. To make a request. Yes. So XHR object is what we are going to be using to make a request and get a response. So who is using it? Will it be only us who's using it? No, the entire industry is built on top of it. People at Facebook also will use it. People at Twitter also will be using it. It's this using for acting with the server and giving a response. See, one of the things that you need to be aware of is whatever we are going to be studying as part of the course is the same thing that is used in the industry. It is the same thing that is used at companies. There is no academic JavaScript or academic MERN and corporate MERN. There is no difference like that. Whatever is used in the industry is what we're going to be doing and studying here. Then what is the difference? The only difference is the magnitude at which you do things is going to differ. For example, you might set up a database, but in the database, you might have only 100 records. But the process of setting up a database, the process of making a request to the database, trying to fetch information from the database, all of that will remain the same. But when I say the magnitude, here you might only have a database with 100 records. But in your companies, you will have a database which will have 10 lakh records. But the process of setting up a database, querying from the database, displaying information, all of that will continue to remain the same. That's the only thing that will change. If you're creating a project which has, let's say, 15 functions, maybe your project would have 150 functions. But how you create a function, how you use that particular thing, how can you make it reusable, all of that will remain the same. Okay. Now, as I was saying, your front end is not only your website, not only something that you're accessing via your browser. Your front end can also be your mobile app. Has this happened to you where you're watching some video on YouTube? Let's say on YouTube, you're using it on your mobile phone. You shift to your website or the web version of YouTube. From that particular point only the video will start. Have you seen that? Or you have added some items to your cart from your mobile phone using Swiggy. But then you log into the Swiggy website, same items are available in the cart. Have you observed this? Now, why does that happen, or how is it even possible? So please keep in mind, when you're using a website or a web application, or you're using a mobile application, both of them are talking to the same server and the same database. So for a mobile application, there is no different database. For a web application, there is no different database. It's the same database. That is the reason if I open Flipkart on my website, on my Chrome, I go to my orders, I see the same orders. If I open it from my mobile phone also, I see the same orders. Because your front end, which is your website or your mobile app, is still talking to the same server, which again talks to the same database. Can you tell me any other application where you see this kind of a sync happening? Where you're doing something on your website, web application, then you shift to mobile, everything is in sync. Can you think of any other web application where something like this is happening? Huh? Very good. Instagram is one. Yes. Gmail is another option, another app. Very good. WhatsApp, it's the same thing that's happening, isn't it? Because they follow the same architecture. Front-end app also, mobile app also talks to the same database. Web application also talks to the same database. That's the reason. Or your Google Docs, right? All these are cloud-based systems. All of them have this synchronizing of data that happens. It's because of this. Anybody from EC background here? EC, Triple E? Okay. Can you think of any other thing that could be treated as a front end? Ah, very good. Yes, Rajan, go ahead. You're correct. It's okay. You use the word. I will continue from there. Ah, those machines, your IoT devices, your GPS trackers. You know, every vehicle, every lorry is fitted with a GPS device. So what is that GPS device doing? It is sending its current latitude and longitude to the server, so that the admin can see, or on his mobile phone or on the website, where exactly that particular vehicle is. I was told even in trains today that thing is there. You can see the live location of a train. Also buses, like if you're booking from Red Bus or any of these places, you can actually see where exactly the bus is on your phone, right? If Ola or an Uber cab fitted with this GPS device, you can see that they'll have that mobile app that they're using. That is what is kind of reading latitude and longitude of the vehicle. But for a bus or a train, it would not be the driver's mobile phone that is sending the latitude and longitude, but there would be some kind of a GPS tracker. And that is also emitting information, right? That can also be treated as your client. So one of the major areas where these kind of skills play a significant role is in not IoT. What is full form of IoT? Internet of Things. Can you give me an example of an IoT device? Traffic lights, okay. Smart home appliances. Sorry? Weather station. So you enter the house, immediately the light turns on. Or from your mobile phone only, you can set the temperature of your AC. All these things are happening. Now, one of the large segments where developers are hired, full stack developers, any tech stack is all right, is in something called as IIoT. Have you heard of IIoT? It is Industrial Internet of Things. See, the home-based appliance, these are all saturated markets. If I say, tell me 3 companies, you will say Godrej or Havells or Orient, something like this. These are having a large segment, large market. There's a consumer market. But there are a lot of companies who are building solutions, especially IoT solutions, but it's called as IIoT. For industries, they'll be developing applications, right? So one of the good company example I can give is our Ovesh, who is attending online. He works for a company called as Enhance. So in their company, they build these kind of solutions, which is going to be deployed at large factories, 10,000, 10 lakh square foot factories. These kind of solutions are going to be deployed, where even in their company, they're using MERN stack. So it is not only an e-commerce segment or a booking application, but in an IoT space, there is a lot of penetration of these kind of things. And you will get to know as days progress how much of your skills is going to be relevant in those companies. Because a company would probably buy a hardware device from China. They will fit it. But the entire system or platform around that particular device, you will have to develop. Maybe, let's say, a humidity sensor, they'll put that particular device. But all the statistics, all the analysis, you have to display it on a front end to the end user. So there's a lot of programming that is involved there. So this is what your tech stack look like. In fact, today using JavaScript, you can also build mobile applications. There's something called as React Native, which is 80% React. If you know React for web, learn another 20%, you can actually start building mobile applications, which can run on an Android phone as well as an iOS phone. Right? You write JavaScript code and export it, like how you create a file, export it to PDF or export it to Excel. Similarly, whatever app you develop, you can export it to Android or you can export it to iOS. So there's a lot of things that is happening, guys. It's pretty exciting thinking about the possibility of technology. Okay. Now, if this becomes the architecture, again, keep in mind, the same architecture will hold good if you're doing Python full stack, if you're doing Java full stack, or JavaScript full stack, or MERN stack. These three things will still continue to be there. There is no difference here. Now, remember what I said, at each of these levels, there are different technologies that is going to be used. So again, when you talk about the front end, one of the scripting languages is called as HTML. How many of you are aware of basics of HTML? Please raise your hands. Basics. Okay. So you would have spent some time reading about it, or Jyoti ma'am would have said, okay, the course commences in the next 2 weeks or 3 weeks time, depending on when you got your selection results. And ma'am would have said, hey, spend some time learning HTML and CSS. Or your brother or sister would have said, hey, starting point is this, you start from here. Okay. So what HTML does is it basically adds a structure to a web page. Then there is also another thing called as CSS. What is the full form of HTML? Okay, very good. HTML is Hypertext Markup Language. What is the full form of CSS? Okay, very good. Cascading Style Sheet. So one is for providing the structure for the web page. The other one is to align and design a particular web page. So we're going to be using CSS. And then when you're working with handling the behavior, then we're going to be using JavaScript. Like, for example, if you go back to the initial screen that I showed you of your exam result. So there was an input field, and then there was a button. So who provides an input field? HTML. How do you create an input tag or an input element? Input. What are the attributes of an input tag? Attributes, type, whose value can be text. Okay. What are the other attributes of an input tag or an input element? Disabled. Okay. Required. Okay. Style, if you're doing on change. Okay, fair enough, no problem. Again, if all of this seem new to you, do not worry. As days go by, we will be discussing about it. So certain things like input field and the button is going to be provided to you by HTML. You saw the result appearing in green color, the style which was centered, the text was centered. You could kind of achieve that using CSS. You need to keep in playing a behavior to the web pages. Moving forward, 2 months, 3 months into, you will start understanding that okay, JavaScript is also going to be doing a lot of for your HTML, because React has something called as JSX, which is similar to HTML. Okay. So what is the behavior that we did in our previous example? The user clicked on the button. So I need to know that the user clicked on a button. That's a behavior that I'm trying to track. That's going to be the role of JavaScript. And then I also have to make a request to the server. That's also the role of JavaScript there. And then the server will give a response. That is the information. Some from the server it is giving. It has to be displayed to the user on the browser. That is also the role of JavaScript. Right? So JavaScript kind of takes care of a lot. The opposite of dynamic website. So static is information is already present, where there is no two-way communication between people, right? Some information is there, you're just reading that information. Like a company's corporate website, home page, a page, contact page, services page, those are all fixed. Those are all static. It doesn't change. But if you talk about Instagram, Facebook, Amazon, Google Pay, these are all dynamic, right? Because you are sending in for all those different types of applications, JavaScript plays a very, very crucial role. Okay. Now, one of the key things and one of the most satisfying thing that you would hear today is when you talk about front end, the only programming language that runs on the front end is JavaScript. That should give you a very big relief. Because irrespective of what the backend technology is, whatever is going to be used on the backend, everybody must use JavaScript when it comes to their front end. There is no alternate for it. So you cannot write Python for front end. You cannot use Java for front end. You cannot use PHP for front end. You cannot use C# for front end. When it comes to front end, the only programming language that will run is JavaScript. How is that possible? Because every browser, irrespective of the browser, be it Chrome, Firefox, Safari, any of them, all of them by default have the JavaScript interpreter present inside it. There is no Python interpreter. There is no Java compiler. Every browser has JavaScript interpreter inside it by default. That's the reason all browsers will be able to execute JavaScript. Now, that means to say there is a 99.9% of market share when it comes to front end. I don't want to say 100. I'll say 99.9% of market share. Now, because there's only one technology which is occupying the entire space, obviously everybody is trying to penetrate that market. If you've seen all KGF movie, all these movies which have hero and villain or villain-centric movies, there is somebody else who's trying to occupy that market share. So the closest competition for JavaScript right now is something called as WebAssembly by Google. So what WebAssembly is trying to do is it'll try to execute some other language But one thing I can tell you is, by the time this becomes as popular as JavaScript is, that is this by one tired. Take many years to come to any of these things to overtake JavaScript on front end, right? Okay, I'll take care of that. All right. So when you're talking about front end, the three technology would be HTML, CSS, JavaScript. Again, you can update this particular diagram. So the browser would have something called as a JavaScript interpreter built inside it. And that interpreter is called as the V8 engine. So the JavaScript interpreter browser, it's called as the V8 engine. Yeah, I'll just see the setting. Now, keep in mind, this is the same exact project Sundar Pichai was working on before he went on to become the CEO of Google. He was working on this project, which is the V8 engine. It's basically the JavaScript interpreter. Again, this is specific to Chrome. Also, the newer versions of Internet Explorer. V8 I'm talking about is because it's very popular in this text community. There's also something called as the Spider Monkey. Spider Monkey is for Firefox. So what you have V8 engine for Chrome, it's the same called as Spider Monkey in Firefox. But for us, V8 is very significant. You'll understand why V8 is significant. So what is the purpose of an interpreter? What is the purpose of a JavaScript interpreter? What is the purpose? What do you think is the role of this? It'll interpret whatever JavaScript code that you've written, right? Line by line, it'll execute that particular code. And it also helps us convert to the machine level and all of that happens, right? So basically, what is the interpretation that is doing? You would have a button. You will say, okay, when the user clicks on this button, run this code. So all that code, whatever you would have written, it will execute. Okay, so we know that HTML is for front end, CSS is for front end, JavaScript is for front end. Now, as I told you, front end, the entire market is dominated by JavaScript. So every company which is out there, they will be using JavaScript in one form or the other. Because for front end, everybody will have a front end, something the user gets to see. So obviously they need to use JavaScript. So in one form or the other, they will be using JavaScript in every company. But you cannot say the same to be true when it comes to backend. Right? On the backend, it is not true. Every company uses JavaScript is not true. Why? We'll understand more about what are the options that are there. Now, when you're talking about backend or server-side technology, one of the programming language that is quite popular is Java. So Java is a server-side programming language or a backend programming language. Java is not a front-end programming language. Java is a server-side or a backend programming language. What is the other programming languages that you have heard of? Python. Come on, give me more. PHP, .NET, Ruby, C#, Golang. Oh, wow, very nice. Who said Golang? Okay, Rajan, Golang. Huh. Tell me more. What are other programming languages you're aware of? C, C++, C#. Dart, Rust, Scala, all of them are your server-side programming languages. Obviously, there are choices for people to make. Hello? There's only one thing, you have no other option, you have to use the same. But if there are 4 or 5 options available to you, people can choose based on their preference, based on their experience, based on their background. They can choose based on the requirement, they can choose. So all the programming languages that you are aware of, Java, Python, C#, Rust, Golang, all of that are backend programming languages, which are meant for handling requests, interacting with database, giving response. Now, JavaScript was never a server-side programming language. I want you to understand this. JavaScript, which was meant for only front end, it was never used for backend until a very significant change happened in IT, especially Sundar Pichai's team had a very big role to play for it. I will tell you what and when it happened. And then your other programming language that you're aware of is PHP. Some of you might have learned PHP during your college. Anybody dealt and worked with Jamstack, Mamstack, done anything with PHP? No? Python scripting you might have done, right? Python scripting you would have done. But have you used Python for setting up a server or setting up for backend, Rishikesh? Have you used Python Django, was it, or Python Flask? Okay. So as you can see here, if a company is using Java for their backend, they can use Java for their backend. They still have to use JavaScript for frontend. That is what Rohit was saying. What Rohit said was, irrespective of what the backend is, for frontend, they must be using JavaScript. So that's why I've learned JavaScript, so that the possibility for any of these companies is higher. Okay. So when you're talking about backend, there are different programming languages. Keep in mind Java, Python, PHP. These are all examples of a backend programming language. Now, should I be knowing everything? Answer is no. I'm just telling you what goes where. For you to land a job, build an application, you don't need to. So when you're talking about database, there are 2 categories of databases. Of course, we'll go deeper into the difference between them, but since today is just a web architecture overview, there are 2 different types of databases. One is called as a NoSQL database or a NoSQL database. One very popular NoSQL database is MongoDB. There is another type of database, it's called as a SQL database, which is traditionally been there for a very long time. Once we go deeper into our courses, we'll understand the difference between NoSQL and SQL. When do you prefer what type of database? All of that will kind of go a little deeper. One of the examples of a SQL database is called as a MySQL database. These are again different databases that are there. And again, end of the day, database is where the information is stored. Now, how does it majorly differ? The major difference, both of them are used for storing information, no doubt. At the end of the day, they differ as to how this information is stored. So if you're working with a NoSQL database, information is stored as a collection. If you know basic programming, it is an array. It's an array of objects. Right? If you're using a NoSQL database, all your information, like marks of a student, is stored as array of objects. How many of you know array data type? Please raise your hands. You all know an array data type? Okay, very good. How many of you know what an object is? Key value pair? Okay, you know what an object is. Okay, great. So information is stored as array of objects. You can see here, because array is used for storing collection of values. You want all the students' information to be stored, so you choose an array of objects. So here it says roll number DCT111, name, mark, grade 9. Roll number DCT123, name, Zach, grade 7.3. So basically you will go to that particular database and try to find the record based on the roll number. So the roll number is DCT123. So you want to get the grade 7.3 back and display it in the user. So remember, there are two categories of databases. One is called as a NoSQL database, and the other one is called as an SQL database. The primary difference between the two is how the information is stored. In a NoSQL database, it's stored as a collection. If you want to bring it down to a very fundamental level, it is nothing but array of objects. Okay, it is basically an array of objects. You can take this down as an example. You can just refer it. Just write array and object. Array is denoted using square brackets. Objects are denoted using curly of an array. Array? Yes, you can manipulate an array. Okay. And is the information unordered or ordered? It is ordered. Objects are basically your key value pairs. Property and a value. Again, we will go deeper into understanding all of this for those of you who are new to this. See, another key thing that you have to understand is there can be a lot of permutation combination that can happen. A company might use Java with a MongoDB database, or a company can use Java with a SQL database. A company can use Python with a MongoDB database. A company can use Python with an SQL database. This is not written in stone saying this technology means only this we have to use. They can always mix and match because each of them are independent technologies. There are something called as drivers and adapters. So through that, you can connect to any of the databases. Okay. Now, how is the same information represented in an SQL database? In an SQL database, information is stored as a table, columns and rows. That's the difference. Like presentation, here you have as array of objects, but here you would have information stored from a table perspective. As in MongoDB, we are using array as so representation is going to be in a table, but they would also be using an array. But doing it from a, which is good. They're called as a table, right? Yes. But the representation you could relate it to be. So we use the term array directly at the database level. We use it. We use a term called as collection, and here we use the term called as a table. It's an array, yes. Because that meant for storage use. Well, in both the cases, as you can see, that you will kind of have a common property like roll number. Either it's going to be a property of an object. Object is what is represented using flower brackets here. So you look for it and then you'll compare. Or here you're going to be looking for a column called as roll number, and then you're trying to look for that particular value, which is going to be present as the fourth option. And that information you can send it to the front end. Okay. Now the most basic and the fundamental is a programming language, which is on the front end. There's a programming language on the back end. There is a different types of databases at the database level. Now I want you to know that company does not only use programming languages. They will not use only JavaScript, or a company will not use only Python, and a company will not use database they will use. But let's talk from a programming language perspective. Now, if you use only JavaScript or only Python, you will have to reinvent the wheel by building a lot of functionalities from scratch. So in companies, time is of very high significance. You want to be more efficient as a developer. So what happens is, for every programming language in companies, they'll be using either a library or a framework. Simply put, along with this, there'll be other technology associated with JavaScript, or there's another technology associated with Python or Java. That is what they will be using, not only JavaScript. So what happens is, can I just know JavaScript and get a job at the company? Can I clear a company interview? Maybe not. Because if the position they're hiring for is a front-end developer, they will expect you to know either React.js or AngularJS, or it's not an and. When you're starting off your career, it's an or, but 2 years, 3 years experienced developers, it will become an and. They need to know React and Angular. But when you're starting off, you just need to know one of it. And why React? Obviously, is like the more popular, is the most popular technology right now. So that's the reason why we are doing this. Now, when it is React.js, that is, it's based on JavaScript. It's AngularJS. Again, it's based on JavaScript. So what happens is, in companies, though the base is JavaScript, they will not use only JavaScript for frontend, but they will use additional technologies like React or Angular or Vue. Why? Because it will make developers more efficient. Like, for example, whatever the example I showed, registration, roll number, submit button, make a request, get a response, update. If you're doing it with only JavaScript like JS behavior I've mentioned, you will probably write around 100 lines of code to achieve the output. But if you're doing the same thing with React, you could probably achieve it in 30 to 35 lines of code. So the number of lines of code that you're writing to get the output is less. Obviously, you're more efficient, right? So a lot of things that are going to be used on a regular basis already built into it. And that's how it's going to make developers more efficient. Because one of the most common thing that you hear in companies is, like, there's a timeline, there's a deadline, there's a due date. And these are not like long due dates, right? 1 week, 2 weeks, there's something called as a sprint cycles, or end of the day. They want that to be present, or they expect that to be completed. To write lesser number of lines of code, but still get the desired output. So for that, companies will be using these kind of technologies. React comes to the front end. Are you all here with me right now? Okay, so this is just to kind of lay a foundation or give you that clarity as to what goes where. Because you might hear people, hey, why are you doing this? Hey, why don't you do this? So you need to know what is what and where each of these things work. Now, similarly, how we said JavaScript is for front end, there are certain technologies associated. Even for backend, there are different technologies associated. Like if you're using Java, companies don't use just Java for developing backend. Companies will be using something called as Spring. That's a technology associated with Java. Same thing happens with Python. Companies don't use just Python. They'll be using something like Django. Of course, there are alternates. I don't want to get into all the names, but there are alternates. I'm just writing the most popular ones here. Same thing happens with PHP. Company will not use only PHP. They will be using something called as Laravel. Now, what is the main essence here? Why am I speaking about all of this? This is to demonstrate that knowing just a programming language is not sufficient. Using just a programming language, employability is going to become less because companies want people to know these additional technologies. Yes, the programming language is the starting point. It is with the language and these technologies, softwares are built in companies. So you should be aware of those technologies as well. Now, as you can see, the current equation, there is no reference to JavaScript anywhere, especially when it comes to the backend. Because Java, Python, PHP, all of them were started off as server-side programming languages. But JavaScript started off as a front-end programming language. You get what I'm saying? So for a very long time, if you go back 30 years, 35 years, the state of technology is Java, Python, PHP were backend. JavaScript was for frontend. This was the state. But then something changed. There was a very important decision taken by Google. Sundar Pichai's team, they took a very important decision. They said, what is V8 engine? Where is it present? Inside the browser. Inside which browser? Okay, is V8 present inside a Firefox browser also? Then what is present inside? Okay, very good. So Google took a very important decision that changed the entire landscape of how JavaScript runs today. So what Google decided to do was they decided to open source their V8 engine. It was a proprietary software which was present inside Chrome, which was meant for executing JavaScript at the browser level. So what Google decided to do was they decided to open source this V8 engine. What happens when you open source a software? Everybody can use it. What is the most popular open source software that you guys use or you've heard of? Windows is not open source. Linux is open source. Windows is pirated. If you're downloading and installing, that's pirated copy, not an open source. Unix. So what is the opposite of an open source software? Licensed, very good. Licensed software, proprietary software, right? And again, the fascinating thing is all these companies, all the famous apps that you use, all of them are built using React today. Because React is open source, they don't have to pay money to Facebook because Facebook is the creator of React for them to use it. They just have to give the credit. I'm using React.js. When they say React, everybody knows who's the creator of React. Okay. Let's take a step back. Full stack developer means what? Somebody who can do front end, somebody who can do back end, somebody who can work with the database. Full stack developer, irrespective, I'm not talking from the technology standpoint. If you say you're a full stack developer, that means to say you can do front end coding, you can do back end coding, you can do database coding. That's the general term, full stack developer. Then you start hearing things about Java full stack, Python full stack, PHP full stack, I've not heard MERN full stack or JavaScript full stack. So what they're trying to communicate is they're saying that, okay, for our backend, we will use Java programming language and Spring. For front end, we'll use HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and React.js. And for database, we'll use either MongoDB or MySQL. That's what a Java full stack means. If they say we are doing Python full stack or we are Python full stack developers, what they're saying is they are saying for their backend or the server side, they're using the Python programming language. Only a programming language is not sufficient. So they're using another technology along with Python called as Django. Front end, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, React. Backend, any of the database. But as you can see, there is one constant. What is that constant here? What is the constant? JavaScript and React is constant. Now comes JavaScript. Now, 2009 or 2008 and later, you can use JavaScript on backend as well. But this is not possible directly. There is a reason for this, right? So JavaScript has, like how Java has Spring, Python has Django, JavaScript has something called as Express. Whatever the server-side coding, instead of writing 100 lines of code, you can do it in 30 lines of code. I'm just giving that as a benchmark. You're more efficient as a developer, basically. That's what it's saying. So important thing to note is every programming language will have its own associated technology that companies will be using. But it did not start from here. JavaScript and Express did not exist from last 30 years. This has probably been there for the last 15 to 16 years. And the major reason for this is introduction of something called as Node.js. What were the two softwares that you installed yesterday? Okay, I said, hey guys, before attending today's class, install VS Code. That is your code editor to write software code. And then I said, install Node.js. Now, what is Node.js? Node.js is not a programming language. Node.js is basically a JavaScript runtime environment. Right? Node.js, whatever you've installed, is Node.js is basically a JavaScript runtime environment. So what does this mean? If I want to execute JavaScript, let's say I'm executing JavaScript in my browser, without V8 engine or SpiderMonkey, do you think my browser will be able to execute JavaScript code? No, right? Since it is present, we are able to execute JavaScript code. If I remove V8 engine, then browser will not able to understand JavaScript code. So keep in mind, JavaScript was only for front end till around 2008, 2009. But then Node.js came along. And for Node.js to be introduced, the decision from Google plays a very big role. Because what Google decided was they decided to open source the V8 engine. Where is V8 present? Inside the browser. They open sourced it and they said, hey, you know what? You guys take the source code for V8 engine. This is how we are executing JavaScript. So that time, one creator of Node.js, he came along and he created something called as the Node.js. What is Node.js? Node.js is a runtime environment for JavaScript. So what is inside Node.js? What is inside Node.js is the Google's V8 engine. What is the purpose of the V8 engine? To execute JavaScript code. So for the very first time, after Node.js was introduced, for the very first time, you were able to execute JavaScript outside the browser. What do you mean by outside the browser? Server side. When you look at web application, client side is browser, server side is your backend. So when you install Node.js, that's the reason I said, hey, install Node.js and come for today's class. Chrome, everybody has. I didn't say install a browser and come. By default, everybody has a browser. But I said install Node.js and come to class. Why? Because it's a JavaScript runtime environment. That means to say, Node.js consists of the Google's V8 engine. So because it has the V8 engine, we can now write JavaScript code and execute JavaScript code outside the browser. Plus, it has some extra libraries or modules called as HTTP. What is the full form of HTTP? Hypertext Transfer Protocol. What is it used for? What is it used for? To build client-server architecture-based applications. Hypertext Transfer Protocol is how the internet works. To make requests, get responses. So what is there? There is the HTTP module present. Because it is present, we can now start building web applications, that is backend applications. What was possible by Java? What was possible by Python? What was possible by PHP? By default, it was not possible by JavaScript. But Node.js was introduced. What is Node.js? It's a runtime environment. What does it consist of? It consists of the V8 engine plus some extra modules like the HTTP module, which is meant for handling requests, giving responses. That is your client server architecture, or that is how you can build your web applications. What is the full form of OS? So for accessing your operating system, to know how much of RAM is available, to create a process, to kill a process, all of that, there's an OS library. What is FS? To create a file, to write to a file, to read from a file, to create a log, to push to that log, and for all of that, there is the FS module. So have you worked with file system like in Java or Python where you have created a new file and then wrote some content into the file, saved the file? Have you done something like that? Huh? In your college days, have you done it? So whatever those functionalities which was possible by other languages, today is also possible by JavaScript. Not by default, of course, we need to have Node installed. Only then these capabilities we will get. So what changed here? What changed was because Node.js was introduced, there is one universal programming language that you can use for developing applications. You can use JavaScript for frontend. You can use JavaScript for backend. You would also use JavaScript for database, for mobile application development as well. Again, please keep in mind, at the beginning of your career, each of this is an OR. You understand logic gates? OR and either this or this. At the beginning of your career, it's an OR. You should know Java or Python or JavaScript. But 2 years into your career, and when you keep going ahead in your career, each of it will kind of become like an AND. You should know JavaScript and Python and Java. But not right now, as days go by in your career. Does this make sense? This whole evolution as to what has happened? Any questions at this point of time? Have you updated this particular diagram in your notebook? So Node.js is basically the JavaScript runtime environment, which consists of the V8 engine, which is responsible for executing JavaScript code. It consists of the HTTP and a few other modules that are there. Okay. Now let's see this, right? We heard this term MERN stack. Some of you knew about it. Some of you were new to this particular term. End of the day, what does that basically mean? What it basically means is M stands for MongoDB. That means to say that's the database that we are going to be using. E stands for Express.js. Is Express front-end or back-end? It's back-end. It's a technology which is built on top of JavaScript, or it is a technology which is built with JavaScript. What is Express capable of doing? It's a server-side code. Basically, it can handle request, interact with database, send that information to the front end. That's the role of Express. R in your MERN is basically a React.js. That is your front end. It's again, I can still develop something without React. I can just use JavaScript, but React will make the code more concise. You as a developer, you're going to be more efficient. So what a company uses is they'll use React for front end, and then N stands for Node.js. That's basically your JavaScript runtime environment. So that is what is powering your entire backend. Without Node.js, can I have Express? Hello? If I don't have Node, can I use JavaScript on the server? No, because by default, JavaScript will not run on the server. For that, we have to install a JavaScript runtime environment. That's your Node.js. So this enables us to write JavaScript code and we can execute it on the server. So there is also mean stack. So when they say mean, instead of React, they're saying that we're going to be using Angular for front end. Right? So this is typically what MERN stack means. And this is where each technology is going to be used. Right? We can. But it made some noise, but it did not continue that momentum. There's another team. It's again, it made some noise at the beginning, but it did not carry the momentum. Same thing happened called as Vue.js also. It was pre-COVID. Vue.js was introduced, and there's a lot of hype being created because social media is very useful, right, for you to create that hype, word of mouth, and all of that. But then kind of died. Don't know the actual reason, but the creator of Vue.js was Chinese. So I do not know why. It was